Hi, I'm Lyndsey McDougall and I'm going to be teaching you hand embroidery techniques. I'm going to start, the aim of this workshop really is to give you as many stitches as possible, starting off with very simple stitches and then going through to a little bit more complicated stitches. I hope to impart as much knowledge as I can throughout the workshop, and I want to just give you the ability to make your own project. So essentially you could use these stitches to embellish clothes or cushions or anything that's material. We're looking at this technique because it's a very old technique, and the techniques that were used at the same period as Colmcille was around, St. Colmcille, they would have had a lot of embroidered vestments during that period. And so embroidery really links us back to the past, and these techniques haven't changed really since the medieval period. So when we're embroidering, we can imagine the vestments and the clothes that would have been embroidered with gold and silk, wool, and perhaps even linen. So we can actually link back to the past, and that's the aim of this workshop, is to just introduce you to this lovely, therapeutic, very relaxing technique of hand embroidery. I wanted to give you a little bit of a background just before we start the workshop on some of the things you might be able to achieve after the workshop. And this is one of the very first samplers I ever made. I was at university. I think it was probably about 18, 19 years old. And it was the first time I'd been introduced to embroidery. And I just found it, I fell in love. And this sampler kind of marks that beginning of that journey for me. It's very, very simple. And some of the stitches that we're going to be learning today are actually in here. We're going to be doing these little stitches like this, which is the running stitch and the back stitch. And we'll probably do chain stitch, might do some feather stitch, fly stitch. This is the feather stitch, sorry. And then we'll do some French knots as well, and cross stitch. So we're going to go through a lot of the stitches that are on this. So you essentially could make something quite similar to this. It's quite small. If you look, there's a pen to give you the perspective. At the start, when I started embroidery, I was always doing very, very, very tiny work. I then went on and did slightly more colourful things. This one needs stretched, but you can see all of the different things you can achieve. And we're actually going to be doing something similar to this stitch here, which is the satin stitch. And then we've got the split stitch here, which I'm also going to show you because it's a very, it's renowned because it was used a lot in medieval ecclesiastic embroidery, so church embroidery essentially. So like those vestments that we were talking about earlier. You can see that you can make beautiful things with embroidery. I'm just going through some of these little marks that I've made on the fabric. And hopefully with the skills I'm trying to impart, you'll be able to make some of your own beautiful embroidered cloths and clothes and different things. A lot of people that come to my workshop end up doing, if they've got children, doing some embroidery for their children's clothes and things. It's really nice to use in that context. This is a plain white, and actually in the north of Ireland we are really famous for our white work. Mount Mellick work, which you might have heard before if you're interested in embroidery. But this is just white thread on white. It's not traditionally Mount Mellick work, but it is taking that kind of tradition and just using the idea of making such like a white beautiful piece of work. As you can see, there's the back, and this was originally a little handkerchief, a linen handkerchief with the letters E hand embroidered onto it. Not by me, by somebody else. And then finally, I just wanted to show you this little bits of this work. This is work that I made when I was on a residency in Mexico. And there's lots of stitches here that we're going to learn today. This is a really large piece, so it's pretty hard to show, and it needs kind of stretched again. But I use it in workshops just to show different stitches. This is the feather stitch, which I'm going to show you today because it's really lovely. Again, you've got your chain stitch here, which if you look at that, and in this case I've used a silk thread, and again that's very traditionally, would have been traditionally used in ecclesiastical medieval vestments, and gold as well, so gold like this, because you get the effect, you can see the light kind of shining off the threads, and it gives a very, very beautiful painterly effect. And some of these threads, this has been dyed with indigo, so some of the threads are dyed. So if you get really into embroidery, you might end up dyeing your own threads. This is the satin stitch, which again I'm going to show you, and the satin stitch there. And I'm trying to see if I've got any French knots, because they're one of the favourites when we do a workshop. These are French knots here. So hopefully this is tufting, which is a different technique, but it's still hand embroidery. The satin stitch here, and then we've got seeding as well, which we might get to. I mean, I don't know how many stitches I'm going to get through in an hour, but we'll see. We'll get as many done as possible. So there you go. We're ready to start now. Hopefully that's kind of inspired you a little bit to show you what you might be able to achieve after the workshop. You just need a little bit of patience with yourself. It will take a while to do this, and remember that I have been doing it for about 15 years, so I might make it look easy, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is easy. Sometimes, especially with the knotted stitches like French knot, it can get, it's a little bit more difficult. And there's a French knot there. So we'll get started. Okay, so we're going to start now with talking about what equipment you need to be able to embroider. You actually don't need that much, and it's not very expensive equipment, so it means you can get started on your embroidery project pretty quickly and pretty easily. The things that I would suggest that you get if you're thinking of following this workshop would be some needles. I particularly love using crewel needles, embroidery needles. And the reason for that is they've got slightly bigger eye. They're actually made for, wool work. But I like it because, it's easy to thread. But you could also just buy a packet of regular embroidery needles. You'll just see on your pack, I mean, you don't have to go for this make, but any make, and just where it says embroidery needles, and have a look at the eye and also how sharp they are. But you can't really go wrong if it says embroidery on the packet. There's also needles, special needles, a different type of needle for beading. Just to be aware of that, they're much thinner and they're specially made for beadwork. Today I'm going to use a crewel needle, and I'm going to be working with cotton thread. This is cotton embroidery, and really it's a single strand cotton, and I'm going to double it up and use it as a double strand. But you can buy cotton thread, and usually it comes in 6-stranded cotton, or it can come in the single strand. So it's up to you, whatever you prefer. But any thread really that you have will be fine. That's just my favourite to use. And then also, I've got a little pair of scissors. You don't have to have exactly the same as mine, obviously. You can have just a small pair of scissors that you can use just to cut your thread and get that all ready. The first tip really that I would share with you is when you're threading your needle, you want the thread to be roughly the distance between your finger and your thumb when you hold the thread at one end, which I'll show you now, and up to this point in your elbow. So you're just holding the thread like this, and that's about the length of the thread that you want. So I'll cut that there. The reason that you don't want your thread to be too long is really because you will get a little bit tangled in the back of your work, especially if you're not used to embroidery, if this is your first time. Of course, there may be people watching this video who've done a lot of embroidery, and in that case, you can go ahead and cut whatever length you want. But for me, I still keep quite a short thread, so it's not that long. That's a little tip. I then put a knot furthest away from the needle, so at the other end of the thread, I'm going to put a little knot in there, and that's going to stop when we start. It's going to stop the thread from pulling through the fabric. You also need fabric, as you're probably thinking, well, you can't just make embroidery with those three things. So we also need fabric. I prefer using linen fabric. So I've got linen, I've got plain. This is a sampler from another workshop that's quite similar to this one. So this is what you should have, probably something like this at the end of the workshop. But I've got my nice clean plain linen fabric. Linen is a natural fabric, so like wool and silk. It's made from natural materials. You could also have something in your house that's synthetic, and that's fine as well. It's just my preference, and I love the lines, the visible line, sorry, in linen, and like seeing the green as well. And it's just lovely texture, but it's completely up to you. Any material really should work. And then the most important probably part of your equipment is an embroidery hoop. If you haven't used one of these before, it's very, very simple. You tighten and loosen the hoops, intertwined hoops, at the very, very top with this little knob. And what you want to do is separate it when you're starting, and you want to put this one that doesn't have anything on it, so it's the plain one, down first in front of you. Then you want to put your lovely fabric down as well. Now, if you look very, very closely on your fabric, you're going to see lines running horizontal and lines running vertical. That's how it's been essentially woven. And those are the lines, the grids that make up the fabric. We want it to be sitting at a cross in front of us. So we want the vertical lines to be straight up here, and we want the horizontal lines to be going across. Then we put the other bit of the hoop on top, which has the little metal part. You've got it loosened, and you're going to place it over the top of the fabric. Then you start to tighten and stretch. Tighten and stretch. And the reason I said that it's one of the most important things is that if you don't use an embroidery hoop, when you stitch, it's all going to be very, very wrinkled and untidy when you've finished. The embroidery hoop essentially gives you the canvas so that you can have a nice clean background without any puckering. It's really, really important, and it should sound a little bit like a drum afterwards. It should be very, very taut. It'll be taut on both sides, and it's a process of tightening and stretching. And once you feel confident that there's no wrinkles in it, it's very tight, it's sitting at a cross in front of you, you are then ready to start embroidery. And the first stitch that we're going to do is the running stitch. It's the most basic stitch, and it's pretty easy. You may have done this before, even if you haven't done any embellishment work. So you've got your thread that isn't too long. It's between your finger and your thumb and this tip of your thing. It's about the tip of your elbow, and it's about that length. You've got your knot at the end furthest away from your needle. I've actually doubled this thread up because it's fairly thin and I want you to be able to see it. But you can use a single strand of cotton, you can use full 6 strands, 2 strands, whatever you want. You always start at the back of your work, okay? I'm going to do giant stitches probably for most of this workshop, but you can make them as small or big as you want. So you come up, it will stop because you've got your knot on the back, and then you go across your fabric, and that is your first running stitch, and you leave a gap, and then you do your next one. Like I said, you can do a small version of this, but I'm going to do it quite large just to make sure that everyone can see. There's a little fly buzzing around. So there you can see, hopefully, that is your running stitch. This is a perforated stitch, as you can see. It's very, very handy when you're mending things, and we use it quite a lot in that instance, but it can also be used to do a curved line for instance, we could just take it on a walk. I often think that it looks a bit like, you know, the lines that you would draw on a treasured map as a child. It's that kind of a line. So you can do whatever you want with this line. You can take it on a little walk, as we like to say, and just explore it. It's an easy, lovely stitch, but we shouldn't underestimate it. So hopefully if you get the hang of that, that's the first stitch and that's the running stitch. We'll keep going. Just doing some kind of a twirly. There we go. But you can do whatever you want. This can also be used to do letters, a perforated line for letters. The next stitch we're going to do is the back stitch, and it's very similar to the running stitch, and it's a nice one to do straight afterwards because I think it's very easy to see the difference. So we've got our lovely running stitch there, and we're going to just do a row of back stitches. Okay, so again, I'm going to do a really, really large one. You don't have to make it as big. And what the simple difference is, rather than going here, what you do is you jump forward on your line, or the direction that you want to go, pull it up, and back in to that previous place where you went down into the fabric. Okay, so you're jumping forward, like that, and then back in to the previous stitch, jumping forward and back in. Now this one is particularly great when you're doing a letter. So if I want to do the letter L, for instance, I'll do one here. So starting the way you do the running stitch, one stitch, and then you jump forward on your line, back in. You jump forward on your line, back in. And you could just leave it like that, or you might do another one, jump forward on your line, back in. What this gives you is a continuous line. So it means that you don't have any gaps like you do in this running stitch, and that's why it's so good for the alphabet. And if you're doing lettering on clothing, or if you're making a cushion for somebody and you wanted to put their initials on it or whatever, or even if you're signing your work and you wanted to do a little signature, like I always put LM at the bottom right hand corner of mine in the back stitch. So it's a really handy stitch to have, and it's very good for outlining even flowers or whatever you're drawing on your fabric. I often don't draw directly onto the fabric, but I know a lot of embroiderers that do, so you might prefer to like draw directly. But I think especially when you're using linen, and you can see the direction of the fabric, and those lines actually keep you fairly straight and accurate. So I think that's probably why I really like linen. But again, it's a different approach, and it's like handwriting embroidery. There's not one size fits all. It's always different. Your signature style of embroidery is going to be different to mine. So don't compare yourself to anyone else. It's just about enjoying it. Okay, so you've got 2 stitches down already, the back stitch and the running stitch. And of course, if you're struggling to keep up, you can pause the video, hopefully, and you can put it back and just watch it again. Now we're going to do the cross stitch, which can be used in 2 different ways. It can be used in count work, where you count all the different squares and you do it very, very neatly, and you keep all the crosses the same. And that's called count work. Or it can be done the way we're going to do it today, in a more free style. And we are just going to enjoy ourselves with the cross stitch and not worry too much about it being perfect. So I'm going to do a giant one to give you the principal idea of what it looks like. So you come up as always, and every time I'm using the thread, I'm always remembering to put my knot at the back of my work so that it doesn't pull straight through. So if your thread is pulling straight through the fabric, it means that you don't have a big enough knot at the bottom of your thread. So a cross, a giant cross, just so everyone can see, is like this. It's a diagonal line, and then we go to the top right hand corner and go to cross over. And its name is pretty self-explanatory. Now I could do tiny little ones and change the direction of them and not keep them in that kind of straight grid-like format. So always people always ask me is like, what direction should you go? And when you're working in this kind of embroidery where it's essentially, it's not count work, it's just freestyle, you don't have to think about the direction really. You can just do whatever direction feels more comfortable for you. I like to start on the left and work to the right, but that might be different for everybody. So just a diagonal line and then across. You can see that it makes this really lovely effect when it's small and you kind of scatter them around. And it's a lovely way of filling up spaces. So even if you had drawn a sunflower and you wanted to put the seeds in the middle, you could do like a little cross and it gives you a lot of texture. So just keep practicing that one. Scatter it around. You can try some large ones and some little ones, some medium ones. Really doesn't matter. It's a really nice stitch to have. So now, at this point, you now have 3 stitches running back and cross, and it's pretty impressive for a couple of minutes. So you can see that hand embroidery is not difficult. However, if you are struggling to keep up, don't forget to just pause the video or replay it. There we have the cross stitch. So now we're going to try the fly stitch, and I've done it here on this sample, so you can see here, these are the fly stitches. So let's try. I think it's called the fly probably because it looks a little bit like, you know when you draw birds on a page and you're just doing the V kind of shape and it looks like they're flying. It might be that reason, I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, I'm going to do a really big one as usual so you can get the gist of it. So this one you need to use both hands. It's not too difficult, so don't panic, but you come up as usual. You've got your knot in the back, your thread stops there. Then you use your thumb, and if you're right-handed, it'll be the opposite of what if you're left-handed, it'll be the opposite of what I'm doing. But I use my left thumb to hold it, and then I go in there. Now, what you've got now is this really large loop, which goes right round there to there. But you're holding this thread in place until about this point, and then you can have a look, and now you've got like a U shape, okay? What you do then is you drop between where you came up in the first place and you pull towards yourself and down, okay, like that. Now you've got the V shape and you're putting a little stitch in here, and that is a fly stitch. Let's try that again. You come up, you're using your left thumb and you're going back in at the top. You're now left with a little loop, on the surface of your fabric. But you drop below with your needle and you come back in, pulling the needle towards yourself and down so that you make this V shape. And then you put a little stitch in there just to cast it off essentially. Okay, so let's try that one more time together. You've got your loop, you hold it with your thumb, you drop below in the center, pull towards yourself and put a little stitch in. Now at this point I've noticed that my fabric is getting a bit loose in my hoop. So what I want to do is just tighten that. Again, you should check throughout your stitching that there's no pulling or the fabric is getting loose in the hoop. You don't want that. You want it to be really, really taut throughout the whole process. So here we have 3 fly stitches. I'll do another little one. Hopefully that was okay for you. It's the same idea. You can make little ones or big ones. It really doesn't matter. They also look a bit like seeds, sycamore seeds or something, I think. But they're a lovely little stitch to have. Oh, I think I've run out of thread. So this is a good this is a good example of where you should leave yourself plenty of thread to kind of tie off at the back. That's always a question that I get in a workshop. So what I'm going to do here in this instance, where I really haven't left myself enough thread to tie off at the back, I cut and I do a little, like just a little knot like that. Okay. The other thing you do is if, for example, let's just deal with this while we're at it. So if I did a stitch, oh, excuse me, did a stitch, say like this, maybe a cross stitch, and then I wanted to go on to a new color, so I want to tie off. I turn it round, and because I've only got 1 layer of fabric here, because you can use 2 layers, but I find for beginners it's really, really good idea to just use 1. I actually tie it to the last stitch that I can see nearest to me. That's how I tie off. I do like a little loop and put my needle through and then kind of let it just tie. And then you've secured it. The other thing that you can do is a tiny little slip stitch. But again, I always put like a little extra knot in it. So you can see here I've got knots everywhere. That should be pretty secure now. That is important. So just see whatever works best for you. Tying it to the last stitch, or if you want to use a double fabric, what you can do is then stitch it onto the back of that fabric. But for me in this instance, I find when I'm doing workshops, it's easiest to just use 1 layer of fabric. So now we're going to try the satin stitch. An example of that is the green here. So you can see that. And it's a lovely stitch. It should look the same on the front and the back, you know, oh sorry, the front and the back. It's a really lovely stitch, and we're going to try it now. I'm going to do another circle, but you could do any shape. And what you do is you just draw a shape, a solid shape on your fabric. So I have a circle here, or a sort of a circle anyway. And I'm going to do this in, what colour? Maybe the green again. So I'm just going to get my thread ready, just like you guys. I'm going to double it up. Did I do the double in that situation? Oh no, I'm going to do a single. It works better with a single strand of cotton. So I'm just going to do a single strand. This takes a little bit of patience, but it isn't a difficult stitch. So let's start. Now the principle is that you're starting on the outside. I really like starting, you can start at this side or on the bottom. It's totally up to you, but for me, I like to start in the middle, and it keeps me a little bit neater when I'm doing it. Oh, my knot isn't quite big enough. Okay, so you just start on the outside of your shape, keeping the ink on the inside, or you could use a pencil, or you might have a special fabric pen, that's fine, but you don't want at the end of this to see any of that pen. So you always have to go to the outside of the shape. And what you do is you're just layering it over the top of the shape, and you're going in at the other side. Whatever side you started is always the side you're going to come up. So I'm always going to come up along this side. As I said, this takes patience, and it kind of is one of those stitches that works best when it's neat, which isn't always good for me, because if you see the back of my work, I'm not a neat embroiderer. However, I like that, and I don't really think that you have to be, especially when you're making pieces of work that you won't see the back of, so, you know, we'll not worry about it. There is an old school tradition of being very, very, very neat at the back, but I like to work really, really fast, so that's kind of more important to me, and I also enjoy it when I don't have to think about it. And sometimes the messiness at the back actually is really interesting and gives you an insight into somebody's mind. Anyway, we'll not talk any more about that. We'll just agree to disagree if you like a neat back. But anyway, it doesn't matter. As I said, embroidery is like handwriting. Some people are really neat, some people are more messy. There's no right or wrong in my very humble opinion. So I'm going to go back down here now and do it the other direction. I just find this keeps me much straighter than if I just start at one end to the other, but of course that would have been the traditional way to do it, so that the front and the back is the same. Always at the outside of your shape. And essentially what you're doing is, you know, wrapping your thread around the whole shape, because it goes underneath and then it comes back up at this side. And you're also just placing the thread right beside the last thread, so it's just laying beside it. And like I said, that just takes a little bit of patience just to get it into the right place. But in the end, you get this really lovely, very solid shape. And that is the satin stitch. Now we're going to attempt the feather stitch, which is a really lovely stitch. I'm going to use 2 strands of cotton again. I've got my knot on the end, and I'm going to go from this top of this here until the bottom here, and I'm going to work it down this way. This is a really lovely stitch, and it's not dissimilar to the process that you use when you're doing the fly stitch. Did I do it in that one? I know I don't have it on that sample, so I can't show you, but I did show you earlier on one of my own samples, so let's try this, okay? So, similar to the fly, you are going to have this lovely loop on your fabric, okay, you can see, and you're going to use your left thumb or your right thumb if you're left-handed, and you come in about there. It's sort of like an L, the end of the L, but this isn't a uniform stitch, so you don't have to be quite as meticulous about where it goes. You can see the loop, and then I'm going to pull down towards myself. That's kind of the first feather loop that you've got. Then what you do is you go over to the other side, dropping below this, so around there, and you kind of go in between the stitches that you've chosen, pull towards yourself. Then you go over to the other side, so you're meandering between the left and the right. You drop below. And you get into this really nice rhythm. Drop below, you've got that loop. Pull down. Over to the other side. Drop below. Pull down. There we go. That's really nice. You can see that you don't have to be super neat about this. And when you're finishing, leave yourself plenty of room to tie it off, and you just put a little stitch in. Similar again to this little stitch that you did for the fly. You're just doing that. And then you can turn over, and I'll just show you how I'm tying it off. I'm just making a little knot on the last stitch, and then I'm going to cut that. And that is your gorgeous feather stitch. I'll take you through that again just to make sure. I'll thread my needle. I'm going to make it a double. Tie my knot at the end. Very, very important. And what I could do even is go over this green line and use it kind of just to mess around. So I'm going this side of it, like that. I'm going to the other side, to the left side, getting the loop using my left thumb, pulling always towards myself. If I pull up when I've got that loop, it'll not work as well. If you're struggling to get that nice lovely kind of V shape similar to this fly stitch shape, then it's just that you're maybe not pulling it towards yourself. You might be just pulling it up like that. And if you pull it up like that, you can see you don't get as much of a shape. So if I redo that and pull it down towards myself, I get that nice shape. So it's actually little simple things like that. It's all about, it's similar to crochet and knitting. It's about the rhythm that you work, and how we always talk about like how tight your work is, you know. It's a similar thing with embroidery. And like I said, there isn't a right or wrong. It's just trying to get the most out of the shape. And there you go. That's the feather. And you can make it it looks like coral to me or something like that. I really love that stitch, and you can fill quite large areas of fabric with the feather stitch very, very, very quickly. So it's a really quick stitch to use, which sometimes when you've been working on something for a long time and you just want to fill an area, this is the one to kind of have a go at. Okay. So there we go. Look how many stitches you've done now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches so far. That's pretty impressive. We've got 2 more to go. Okay, now we're going to try the French knot. And it's a slightly more difficult stitch, but I think because you've gone through all of these other stitches, you're going to be able to do this one. So let's try it. And I'm going to try it a few times with you, so it's not to worry. We can just keep trying. Now, the main thing is you come up just like you do normally, but you're going to use both of your hands in this instance. Now, I'm going to do the right-handed version a couple of times, and then I'll do a left-handed version so that anyone that's left-handed could try it as well, because it can be quite confusing to swap the hands around. Now, come up here. We bring the thread that we've pulled up like this between our finger and our thumb of our left hand, if you're right-handed, and see this line that I've created and this tautness I've created with my finger and my thumb between here where I've come up and here. This needs to be tight the whole time until I tell you when. What you do then is you bring your needle down towards where you came up, towards that hole there, and you wrap it twice. People always ask me, can I wrap it 3 times? Yes, you can if you want, but traditionally the French knot is a 2 wrap stitch. So then what we do is we use our right hand to go back in just beside, right beside where that needle came up. Okay, so we have something like this. Now the key to this is keeping this line taut the whole time. So you kind of have to teach yourself to do that. Then you bring your right hand and you go to the back of your work and you pull that stitch through. You don't let go with the left finger and thumb until this point, until you're actually pulling at it. Then you can let go and you've got your first French knot. Okay, we'll try another one. You come up. Finger and thumb of your left hand is going to keep this line taut, this piece of thread, the whole time. Your right hand brings the needle down towards where you came up and you wrap the needle twice. Do that wrap again, okay? So needle down towards where the hole is there. 1, 2. Then you go back in very close to where you came up. You can let it go because you've still got this line taut the whole time. You bring your right hand and you put it underneath your work, underneath the hoop, and you pull the thread through. We'll do one more. I'm going to make a triangle, I think. Up with your right hand. Use your left hand to keep this taut. Wrap it twice. Back in, just beside where you came up. Right hand to the back of the work and pull it through. For left-handed people, if you're right-handed, do not watch this. You bring it up with your left hand. Use your right hand to keep the work taut. And you wrap the needle and you go back in. You're keeping this right hand taut the whole time and you bring your left hand to the back of the work and pull it through. Okay, I'll try that one more time for the left-handed people. Bring your left hand, pulls the thread up. Your right hand grabs the thread. You bring the needle down towards where you came up and you wrap. Wrap twice. You go back in beside where you came up, keeping this right hand taut the whole time, this little bit here. And you bring your left hand to the back of the work to pull the knot through. There we go. I'm not left-handed, obviously, so I hope that wasn't too clumsy, but hopefully that helps. Let's just practice the French knot. It's really lovely when you do little clumps of them. Again, it's very useful when you're doing botanical embroidery. You could even use it for lettering, but I actually like it when it's all sort of gathered in a little bunch. You know, and it can look like roses very easily. It's also a really lovely one to try if you've got any wool thread or silk ribbon thread or anything like that. Obviously there's lots of different types of thread and today we're only using, so far we've only used cotton. I'm actually going to use silk for the final, or the next stitch, sorry, the split stitch. So I'm kind of running out of thread there, so I'm going to tie it off at the back. Just the last stitch as usual, putting a little knot in. Cutting it. But that is your French knot. It's a nice risen stitch with lots of texture. So hopefully that's a helpful and useful stitch for you. I'm going to now show you this split stitch, which is very, as I said, was used a lot in the medieval period for ecclesiastical embroidery. I'm going to use some silk thread for this because it's really, really thick, and this works very well with thicker thread. So you might use all 6 strands of your cotton, for instance, when you're doing this one. I hope you can see this okay. It is actually pink thread, but it's looking a bit white here on the camera. But anyway, I'm going to do a massive one. Now these are done, it's usually a very small stitch, so I'm going to do a big one just to show you the mechanics of it. You just do a running stitch essentially, and what you then do is go back into the stitch and split it open, and that's why it gets its name. and you go forward. Now this works best in a small stitch. It's actually more difficult to get the effects right in a big stitch, but you can see I'm going back into the last stitch and I'm splitting it open, going right through thread. Now if I do that on a smaller scale, even here, you might start to see how it works. Splitting it open. Do you see that? So that's the kind of size you would want to make it. No bigger than a half a centimetre, I would say. And then you start to get the effects. Now it was used a lot of the time to fill in large areas, so it's a filling stitch. And what it looked like then afterwards is the light reflects off all of the different threads, and it looks really like a painting. And we call this thread a painterly effect, really, and it, just the way the light hits it. It's a really beautiful stitch, and if you go to any museum and you look at medieval church embroidery, you will no doubt find an example of the split stitch on it somewhere, on the vestment somewhere. So you'll be able to recognise that now if you ever visit a museum and have a look at medieval embroidery. It was often used on the saints' faces, and it's a really nice way. It doesn't have to be done in a straight line. You could do it in, you know, a circle or whatever. It's very, very, very fluid stitch, so it can move around. It doesn't have to be done in a straight line, but the effect is seen mostly when you've got these layers of them, you know, lines and lines of them. So just one single line looks completely different than having like 20, if you understand. So it's a stitch that you have to work and kind of enjoy. So anyway, that's your connection to medieval Ireland. A very, very popular stitch during that period. I think I'm going to show you possibly one more stitch. We're going to do the chain stitch now, but before we do, I'm going to move my hoop around my fabric. If you keep in the middle and only do a circle, you can do that, that's not a problem, but I quite like using up all of the fabric. So you just get your hoop, put it on your table or in front of you, and remember you're looking at the horizontal and vertical lines on your fabric. You are loosening the top of your embroidery hoop, putting it over the fabric, and then it's that process of tightening and pulling the fabric through, stretching it until you see absolutely no wrinkles. I'm sure you're annoyed, or not annoyed, but sick of me saying about the hoop, but it is so important, and we do need to always check our embroidery hoops. If we get all of that, if we get that right at the start, then we'll have less problems when we're actually trying to hand embroider. Just getting it very tight. Okay, and that's me ready to go. So now I can show you how to do the chain stitch. Believe it or not, I'd forgotten what stitch I was doing there. That's why I took that long moment to distract you. Anyway, the chain stitch, I am going to use again a double stranded cotton here, putting a knot at the end, and I've got my needle at the other end, and I'm ready to go. I'm going to do it down this way. So you may have done the chain stitch. I don't know, I find that this is the one of the ones along with the running stitch that many people have tried before, which is interesting. So maybe we used to learn it at school, I don't know. But we start here and we're going to work our way down. Now you can work your way across or whatever, but this is the way I find it easiest. I use my thumb. There's different ways of doing the chain stitch, so somebody that's watching that has done it before might think that's not the way I was taught. it's the same outcome, there's just different methods. I actually just do it this way, and I find this is the easiest way to teach. So you've got your hoop, you're going back into your hole, and you've got the loop on your fabric. And similar to even the fly, you are pulling, but what you do is don't pull too much, and you're just going to let your chain kind of be loose and lovely and curved at the top. Then you go back into that hole, which is within the circle, which is within the loop. Using your thumb, oh, it's because I let go there to show you. That's why you don't let go. Right, so you're using your thumb to essentially keep this from doing what it just did on mine. You can see. So your thumb is kind of guiding the thread. Drop below in the direction that you're going. Pull, but not too tight. Use your needle to kind of fix, and back into the same hole there. Use your needle to fix it. This is a fairly large chain. Again, I'm doing it quite large. You would probably do it even half the size. Okay, I'm going to tie it off. You just put like a little stitch in like you did in the fly, and that's your chain stitch. I'm going to do another row of that, of the chain, just to give you another chance to have a look. Just tie it off, cut. We'll choose another colour. Maybe we'll do the pink. Again, I'm not going to take too long a piece of thread because I don't want to get tangled at the back. Chain is also much nicer when it's a single strand. I think for me, when it's a double, you can kind of, some of the stitches you can kind of see when it's a double, and that's, you can see it there. But anyway, it's easier for you to see, so that's more important. A chain also doesn't have to be in a straight row. It could be a curved, so we'll do a curved one now. So again, you come up, you go back into that hole, or right beside it if you can't get in, and you use your thumb to create that circle or that loop. And I'm going to just do a curve. So this is the direction I'm going. I'm going to just fix the stitch with my needle and make sure that I don't pull it too taut, because if I pull it too tight, it'll just go into a straight line. We don't want that. We want the little curved loop. I'm going to get smaller here just to show you how nice it can be when it's smaller. So it's also a really nice stitch. You can create really nice lettering if you do it really small. It doesn't have to be straight, as I said, so you could do essentially a circle or you follow the shape of anything. And there we go. You can see the curved line. And then to cast off, you just put a little stitch in. And that is your lovely chain stitch. These also can be done on their own, which I'm going to show you now. So we'll grab another piece of the pink and I will show you how they look when they're what we call a detached chain stitch. It's literally just what it says. It's not in a row, it's just on its own. So I'll do a very large one. So you've got the same principle, you've got that loop, drop below, and you tie it off as an individual stitch, like that. Now you could do a row of those and they kind of look like tulips. Like this. Oh, I've just pulled that a bit tight, so to use my needle to kind of fix it like that. Or you could do it like in a circle, you know, fix a point and then do it all around. It's completely up to you, but it is a lovely stitch. I'll just do one more here, a wee tiny one. this didn't feel right to you, if it felt a bit awkward, you can try different ways of doing it, but the principle is the same. You have to catch the loop, and when you're working the chain, just be patient and give yourself, and don't pull it too tightly towards yourself. That's probably one of the most important things. The last stitch that I'm going to show you is called seeding, and it's here on our example. It's these tiny, it's literally just a tiny little stitch that is changing direction, and once you do it, it looks sort of like seeds of a tree or a plant. You know, it's like scattered seeds really effect, I suppose, and that's why it gets its name. Now we're going to try on our sample. I have again done a double thread. I've put a knot furthest away from my needle. It's not any longer than between my finger and thumb and the point in my hand. That's the length that it is, or my elbow. I need to go to an anatomy class. And I'm just going to fill here like I have in this one, so you can see here. But what you do is you just enjoy yourself with this stitch. It's really like, say, the way you start the running stitch, okay? And then you just change the direction of the stitch, and you scatter it around your fabric. It doesn't really look like anything if I do it big, so I have to kind of just do it small for you, and hopefully you can start to see the effects of it. But it's a really lovely, another way of what we would call, a filling stitch, and you can fill an area of your fabric with this very quickly, and it gives just a really gorgeous scattered seed effect. But of course it's applicable to lots of other kinds of mark making and drawing activities that you might want to do on the fabric. I know sometimes people like to have a drawing to follow, but the purpose of this workshop for me is to try and give you the tools that you can actually design your own fabric, your own drawings. And that might just be focusing on the stitch. If you're not a drawer and you don't want to go out into nature and draw trees or anything, you don't really think that you've the ability or the want to do that, then I would just try by enjoying the stitches for what they are. So it can be quite abstract. I mean, these pieces aren't of anything. They're just about the stitches that you're practicing. So, and those to me can be equally as beautiful as an illustrated embroidery. So hopefully this will give you the encouragement to just really try and practice. Can you start to see the effects of the seeding stitch and how lovely it is? I mean, you could go for days on that, and it could spill right down into here. You know, it's again, it just flows, and it's really lovely stitch to use. Hopefully you can see that okay. I have done it in between one of our fly stitches. So look how many stitches you have. There's so many that we've learned today. I'm sure I would be impressed if I could see your work. And hopefully that's given you the tools and the confidence to go and try even more embroidery. I just wanted to share some books that I enjoy reading or following whenever I'm doing embroidery. The first one is 100 Embroidery Stitches. It's by Anchor Embroidery Stitches, and I think you can still get these books, not for very much money. You can see my names on it. It's really just like 100 stitches that you must need to know. Lots of nice cellist work there, and darn stitches, and let's see what else we have. You've got your cross that we learnt today, loop stitches, outline stitches. It's got everything. It's got 100 stitches, and it's a really easy, nice pocket kind of friendly book. The RSN, the Royal School of Needlework, do a lot of books. I'm not getting commissioned on any of these. I'm just showing you the books that I've used in the past. What's nice about theirs is there's quite clear pictures, and you've got a nice guide and lovely visuals to kind of guide you through. Stomp work is a type of embroidery where it's raised, and they do lots of different crewel work, whatever else, white work, etc. So there's lots of different styles of embroidery. This is a lovely book as well. It's about the history of silk in Ireland by Maria Dunleavy. But I particularly wanted to show you just this section. It's not specifically about embroidery, but she does write a lot about silk, obviously, in Ireland and its history. And one of the things that she talks about is the Waterford vestments. And this is some of the pictures of those, and you can see the gold work, and they're called the cloth of gold. So if you're ever in Waterford, you can go and have a look at those in the museum there. But there's lots of examples of medieval embroidery, and these faces actually have split stitch in them. So there you go. There's different books. This is probably something like this is going to be your most important little guide if you are interested in embroidery, and I look forward to maybe seeing some of your work at some point. So good luck with your projects. I hope I have laid things out clearly enough, and just really enjoy yourself. Remember, there's not a right or wrong. It's just about experimenting, and I think hand embroidery particularly is something that's very, very relaxing and nearly meditative. So just enjoy that process of carving out some space for yourself and enjoying it. Good luck.